We are on DAF Mem Beis Amud Aleph. We're going to finish the parak. We're on the 5th line, and we're talking about the evils of chanufa, which is we would translate as obsequiousness, false flattery, trying to garner someone's good graces by being deceptive, by being flattering, and so forth. So, Va'amar Rabbi Elazar says, Kol Eda sheyesh ba chanufa me'usa kenida, that any congregation that possesses this trait of chanufa, which means, my understanding is that within the congregation they shmeichel the gevirim, the wealthy balabatim, or the balabatim of influence, and they ignore any bad things that they do. That congregation is me'usa kenida. It is as despicable as a nida in the sense that it's unseemly as a nida. Shenemar ki adas chenef galmod. That the pasuk in Eov says ki adas chanef galmud. That the congregation of flattery is galmud. Now, what do we know that? What does galmud mean? Shekein bekirchei hayam korn lenida galmuda. That in certain far-flung areas they call a nida a galmuda. And my galmuda, what does it mean, galmuda? Gemula da mi ba'ala. That it means that, like the word galmud means forsaken or bereft. And so when a woman is a nida, she is forsaken by her husband. So she has to be isolated. She can't be with her husband. So that's what the word galmuda means. Va'amar Rabbi Elazar kol eda sheyesh ba chanufa l'sof gola. Furthermore, such a congregation will eventually be exiled. Ksiv hacha ki adas chanef galmud, because we see that the word galmud is associated with flattery. Uchasiv hasam, and then it says in Sefer Yeshaya, v'yomarta bilvavecha mi ol adlias eila v'ani shechula v'galmuda gola v'sura, that the word galmuda is associated with gola, exile, in the pasuk in Yeshaya. So you see that therefore someone who is called galmuda is also gola, is also in exile. Amir Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba arba kitos ein makablos pnei shechina. There are 4 groups of people that will never be able to accept the divine presence, the face of the divine presence. What that means is that they are completely disassociated from godliness, and therefore they cannot be connected in any way to Hashem. So what does this mean? So who are these 4 groups? Kas leitzim, v'kas chanifim, v'kas shakranim, v'kas misaprei lashon hara. The group of scorners or scoffers, people who make jokes in order to ridicule Torah ideas. Kas chanifim, the group of flatterers. Kas shakronim, the group of liars. And v'kas misaprei lashon hara, the group of gossipers. Kas leitzim dichsiv mashach yado es lo tzitzim. How do we know that scoffers are denied the Pnei HaShechina? Because it says God withdraws His hands from those who scoff. Kas chanifim dichsiv, as it says, and this is a pasuk in Eov again, ki lo lefanav chanef yavo kas shekarim, that the group of shakranim, yavo, ki lo lefanav chanef yavo, that God will not come in the presence of flatterers. And kas shakranim, and what about the group of liars? Dichsiv dover shekarim lo yikon leneged einoi, that those who speak falsehoods will not be established before my eyes, says Hashem. And finally, kas misaprei lashon hara, the group of gossipers. Dichsiv ki lo kel chafetz rasha ata lo yigur chara, that you are not a God who desires a wicked resha, evil. Are you, O God, that no evil will reside within you. And what the Gemara says that means is, Tzadik ata Hashem lo yagur b'makor chara, because the fact that you are completely righteous, Hashem, there is no perversity or evil within you, then anyone who is evil cannot reside with you. And Rashi says, the Ra, contextually, of these psukim has to do with the use of the mouth for evil purposes, because the whole context of that kapitel is people who sin with their mouths. And it's interesting because all 4 of these are defined as not individuals, but as kitim, groups. Why are they called the groups of scorners, the group of liars? It would seem to me it's because these are communal activities that the Gemara is describing. You can only be a mesaper lashon hara within a group. You can only be a flatterer within a group of people where the community itself tolerates this kind of schmeicheling. And the same thing would be true of liars, groups of liars, and groups of scoffers. Okay, we now continue along the theme of certain people who have to recite formulaic words that are defined by the Torah, and here too they have to be recited in Hebrew. And so the next person in this category is the Mashuach Milchama. What is a Mashuach Milchama? He is the Kohen specially appointed to rally the troops, give them a pep talk before they go out to battle. This is documented in Parsha Shoftim. And it says, B'shashim adaber el ha'am b'lashon ha'kodesh hayamedaber. That when he would speak to the troops, he would speak to them in Hebrew. Shene'amar v'haya kekorobchem el ha'milchama v'nigash ha'kohen. That the Torah says in Parsha Shoftim that when you come close to battle, the Kohen will approach. Zeh Kohen Mashuach Milchama. This refers to a specially designated Kohen called the Kohen who was anointed for war. V'diber el ha'am, he will speak to the nation, b'lashon hakodesh. That teaches me that he has to speak in Hebrew. Now, how is that apparent from the words v'diber el ha'am? The Gemara will explain. V'amar alehem Shema Yisrael, and he will say to them, according to the Torah, Hear, O Israel, Atem kerevim hayom lamilchama al oyevechem. You are now approaching today against your enemies. And then what he was implying to them, and perhaps what he would expand upon, is as follows: V'lo alachechem. You're not going out to war against your brethren. Lo Yehuda al Shimon v'lo Shimon al Binyamin. He says, there have been civil wars in the history of the Jewish people. But this is not like a civil war where Judea fights the Shimonite, or where the Shimonite fights the Benjaminite. She'im tiplu biyadam yirachmu aleichem. He says, in those situations, if you fall into the hands of the enemy, they will have compassion upon you. So, in a sense, it's a liability to fight a benevolent enemy because your rationale is, all right, the worst is I'll get captured. So the worst is I'll get captured, and they'll treat me nicely. So maybe you won't be inspired to fight to the death because I'd rather get captured by the enemy than get killed at the battlefield, right? Kamash Shenemar, as it says, Vayakumu ha'anashim asher nikavu b'shemos. Because there's an episode in Tanakh, it says in Divrei Hayamim, that there was a civil war, and the men who were Vayachaziku that had been called to battle, Vayachaziku bashivya, and they took hold of all of the captives. V'chol ma'arumeihem hilbishu min hashalal. All of the people who needed clothes, they clothed the POWs, and they gave them clothing from the spoils. Vayalbishum, vayanilum, vayachilum, vayashkum, vayaskum, vayanahalum bachamurim l'chol koshel. They gave them clothes and shoes and food and drink and anointments, and even those people who had trouble walking, they gave them rides on donkeys. Vayiviyum yiricho yiratimori meitzel achayim vayashuvu shomron, and they brought them to Jericho, the city of dates, to be with their brethren in the POW camp, and they went back to the Shomron. So you see, when there was a war between Ephraim and Yehuda, so at least there was a compassionate behavior with the treatment of the POWs. Al oiveichem atem holchim. But the Kohen's point was, you're going out to war against your enemies today. Shim tiplu biyadam ein merachamin aleichem. If they capture you, don't expect that compassionate treatment. They're not going to have any rachmanis on you. They're like ISIS. So, by the way, is he trying to scare them? What is he trying to do, the Kohen? He's trying to tell them, fight to the death, because there's no other option. Do not let them take any prisoners, because if you don't fight to the death, it's not going to be a summer camp when you get taken as a prisoner. Al yerach levavchem al tiru uval tachbazu. Do not let your hearts melt, the Torah says. Do not be scared, do not be frightened. And there are actually 4 different terminologies of exhortation not to be scared, which the Gemara will analyze. Al yerach levavchem ipnei tzahala susim v'tzitzuach charavos. And the Mishnah actually starts the explanation. Do not let your hearts melt from the the trampling of the horses. What they used to do is they used to make sure their horses would stamp extra hard to frighten the enemy. And do not be scared of the clanging of the swords. Do not be fearful from the banging of the shields, which is another way that they used to try to make noise and frighten their enemy. V'shifas hagalagsin, and the troops would walk clomp, 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 like really hard. Al tachbezu mikol kronos, al tartzu mipnei kol tzavachos. Do not be scared of the sound of the shofar blasts that the enemy blows with their horns, right? And don't be frightened from the sound of the battle cries. And you know why the pasuk says, Ki Hashem Elokeichem ha'olechi machem. Hashem is going before you in battle. Heim boim b'nitzchano shel basar v'dam, v'atem boim b'nitzchano shel makom. They are going out only with the hope of victory of human strength, but you're going out with the guarantee of victory because Hashem is with you. Plishtim bo b'nitzchano shel Golias, maha yasofo l'sof nafel b'charev v'naflu imo. He says, for example, the Philistines came with the confident victory that they would achieve through Goliath, through Goliath. But what was his demise? He fell, and all of the other Philistines fell as a result. B'nei Ammon bo'u b'nitzchanu shel shoivach, maha yasof v'losof nafel b'charev v'naflu imo. In Sefer Shmuel Beis, we read about a war that David had with Aram and with Ammon. And the general at arms, who was very powerful, his name was Shovach. But what was his end? He ended up falling in battle, and everyone else fell with him. V'atem kain. But you are not like that. Ki Hashem Elokeichem ha'olechi machem liyilachem lachem ze machanei ha'aron. Because Hashem, your God, is walking with you to fight for you. And this refers to the camp of the battalion that transported the Aron when they would go out to fight. They had the Aron with them, or at least one Aron with them. So the Gemara, we'll analyze this Mishnah line by line, but the Gemara says, Maika Amar. What is the Mishnah mean when it says that we can see from the Psukim that the Kohen Mashuach Milchama had to speak in Hebrew? Where do you see it? So Hachi Kamar, Shenamar V'diber, Ulahalan Oimer Moshe Yidaber Ve'alokim Ya'anenu V'kol. Malahalan B'lashon HaKodesh, Afkan B'lashon HaKodesh. You see that the same language of Yidaber in the future tense is used in the context of the Ten Commandments. Moshe Yidaber, Moshe will speak or would speak, and therefore you see that that's a reference to, that's just like the Ten Commandments were recited in Hebrew, so too anytime you see Yidaber or Vidiber in the future tense, it's referring to speaking in the Hebrew language. Tanu Rabbanan, V'nigash HaKohen Vidiber El Ha'am, Yachol kol kohen sheyirtzeh tamulomar v'diberu ashoterim. Now, the Brisa now teaches us the law of a kohen mashuach milchama. Now, how do we know who this person is supposed to be? So it says that the kohen shall approach and he will speak to the nation. So you might think that this could be any kohen that just go into the temple and just pull out any regular kohen. No, it says v'diberu ashoterim. Now you need to know the sequence of the psukim over there. First it says that the kohen mashuach milchama, the kohen says, you're now going out to war, do not be fearful. And then it says v'diberu ashoterim, and then the officers will speak to the people, and they will say all of the exemptions of war. Who is the person who has just gotten married? He is exempt from war. Who is the person who has just built a house, or just planted a vineyard, or is fearful, or is yellow? He is exempt from war. And as we'll see, Rashi explains to us, the Gemara understands that the Shotrim are really only communicating the same message as the Kohen Mashuach Milchama. It's not that they're giving two different messages. They're acting as the Shluchim of the Kohen Mashuach Milchama. But we see that the Torah is connecting the Kohen who's making this rally call to the Shotrim, to the officers. Ma Shotrim b'memuna, af Kohen b'memuna. Just like officers have to be appointed to their posts, so too the Kohen Mashuach Milchama is to be an appointed position. So it's not just any Kohen can be pulled out of the ranks of the temple. He has to actually be appointed for this specific duty. Ve'ema Kohen Gadol. Maybe he should be the Kohen Gadol. How do you know he's a separate person? The Gemara answers, Dumya de Shoter. Ma Shoter sheyesh memune al gabav, af Kohen sheyesh memune al gabav. Because the Torah compares this Kohen to a Shoter, an officer. Just like an officer has a superior commander, so too this Kohen has a superior commander, and since a Kohen Gadol does not have a superior commander, it's not referring to the Kohen Gadol. So the Gemara asks, Kohen Gadol nami ha'ika melech al gabav, but a Kohen Gadol also has a superior. He has the melech that's there to command him. The Gemara answers, ba'avodaso ka'amar. No, what we mean to say is that an officer has a superior commander above him in the ranks. Because why? Because a shoter is answerable. What is a shoter? It's a peace officer. It's someone who's there to control the troops, control the enemy, and so forth. So a shoter, by definition, has a superior officer called a shofet, a judge who's a commander, right? So therefore, a kohen also has to have someone who's above him in the same kind of work. So just like the Kohen Gadol has no superior in his work of the kahuna, so he can't be the one that's being referenced by this. Granted, he has a melech above him, but not someone who does the same kind of work as him, who is his superior. And that's how we know that it's different from the Kohen Gadol. Ve'ema sgan. Maybe it's the sgan Kohen Gadol, the Kohen Gadol understudy. Maybe that's the one that should be. Who says it's got to be a third different person? So skan lav memunahu. The Tanya Amar Rabbi Chanina skan kohanim lama skan memuneh shem ira bo psul bekohen gadol nichnasu mishamesh tachtav. He says the answer says the Gemara, a skan kohen gadol is not an appointed position until he actually. It's not considered an appointed position until he actually takes over for the kohen gadol. He's an understudy. So an understudy is a nobody. They're not in the play, right? Until the main actor gets sick. Similarly, the skan Kohen Gadol is not a Kohen Gadol, is not an appointed position at all until the Kohen Gadol gets sick or is incapacitated. So therefore, you can't say that it's an appointed position because he's not considered to be appointed until he actually has to take over. So therefore, we know who is the only person left that is appointed and is not the Kohen Gadol. It must be the separate person called the Kohen Mashuach Milchama, who's designated for specifically this person. Ve'omar alehem Shema Yisrael. And so what will the Mashuach Milchama say to them? He'll say to them, "Hear, O Israel, you are now going out to battle today." My Shna Shema Yisrael. Why does he start with the word Shema Yisrael? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Amar Lahen HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael Afilu Lo Kiyamtem El Kriya Shema Shachris Va'arvis Iatem Nimsarim Biyadam. That what the Kohen is alluding to them is that even if the only merit that you have is that you daven, you say Kriya Shema in the morning and in the evening, that is sufficient merit for Hashem to guarantee that your battle will be victorious. Now, al yerach levavchem al tira uchule, do not let your hearts melt, do not be fearful, etc. Tana Rabbanan pa'amayim medaber imam echos bisfar ve'echos b'milchama. That the Kohen Mashuach Milchama speaks to the army twice. Once when they're at the outskirts of the camps, where they're encamped, and once when they're actually on the battlefield. Bisfar mahu omer, at the camps, what does he say? Shim'u divrei ma'archei milchama v'chizru. He says to them, listen to the rules that the shotrim are going to tell you, the ones who are organizing you into your battle positions, and make sure that you make sure that there is no one in your ranks that is supposed to go back from the battle according to the rules. Someone who's just built a house, just gotten married, planted a vineyard, or who is yellow. Those people you have to remove. So that's the first instruction that he gives them already in the army camps. Make sure that you follow the rules of the Ma'archei Milchama, of those who are organizing the battalions. And Ba Milchama Mahumer, but once they're out on the battlefield, he's also with them and he tells them, Men al yerach levavchem al tira'u ve'al tachbazu ve'al tartzu. Do not fear. And he uses 4 different languages of fear. Kineged arba dvarim she'ovdei kochavim osim. And this, says the Gemara, corresponds to 4 different things that the enemy deliberately does in order to instill fear within the Jewish hearts. Megifin umerian sevachim veromsim. Megifin, like we learned before, is that they bang on their shields. Merian is that they blow their horns. Savachim is they do battle cries. The Romsin is that they trample with very strong hoof beats with their horses. The other things that they do, as far as the clanging of the swords and the stomp, stomp, stomp of the soldiers is not done specifically for the purpose of instilling fear. It is a sound that you hear on the battlefield, but it's done more to organize the troops and the sound of swords is what happens in warfare. But it's not deliberately done to instill fear, and that's why it's not counted as one of as part of this category. Now, Plishtim bo b'nitzchanu shel Goliath chuli. So then the Kohen tells them, let's look at the Philistines. They thought that they had an easy victory when they came with Goliath. Now, Goliath is going to be analyzed by this Gemara today, and it's interesting to note that the Gemara's analysis is that not only was Goliath a formidable physical enemy, but he was also a spiritual enemy. According to Chazal, as we'll see, there were a lot of things that Goliath had in mind to destroy the spiritual essence of Klal Yisrael, very much like the Hanukkah story that we're celebrating today. So Goliath, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, why was his name called Goliath? The answer is because Sha'amad begiloi panim lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because he stood brazen-faced in front of Hashem. Shenamar beru lachem ish v'yered elai. He said, choose for yourselves a man, an ish, and let him come down and fight me. And what was he really saying? Ve'ein ish el HaKadosh Baruch Hu shenamar Hashem ish milchama. He was referring to Hashem. Let your God come and fight me. As we know that the word ish is a reference to Hashem, as it says in Oz Yashir, Hashem ish milchama. God is a man of war. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu harini mapil al yedei ben ish. Hashem says, I'll show him. I'll cause him to fall by the hands of the son of a man, meaning like a bacher, not someone who he thinks is so formidable. Shenemar v'David ben ish Efrati hazeh, that it says that David, the son of the Ephratite man, right? So he's the ben ish. He's not an ish yet. He's a ben ish. Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Meir bishlosha mekomos lechado piv laoso rasha. There are three statements that Goliath said that caused his own demise. In other words, he said things that really were like if statements, that if you guys can defeat me, and within those if statements really were a portent of his own demise. Echad beru lachem ish v'yered elai. The first one is where he said, choose a man and let him fall down upon me, or come down upon me, which is a way of saying that maybe he'll defeat me. Right? He says, if your warrior can smite me, then we will become your slaves. Now, of course, he was taunting them, because he was saying, no one's going to be able to take me. Right? But because he said it as an if statement, he was really portending his own fall. And the third time is that when David comes out to war and he looks at this little, what he views as a punk, and he says, he says, you think I'm a dog that you come out with me with just a walking stick? Right? He didn't realize, because David didn't carry any weapons. He had a walking stick, or a shepherd's stick, and he had his sling. So Goliath thought, what can you possibly do to me? So David nami amarle, and David responded to him. Now, this point the Gemara is making is that David did not speak with that kind of offensive language, taunting Goliath to say that you think you can defeat me. What is that? That's called trash talk, in the ghetto. He says, David didn't use trash talk. David said it straight. He says, Ata boi lai bacherev bechanisu v'kidon. As the pasuk says, you've come against me with the sword, with the spear, with the javelin, and you think, but do you think that's going to come to your aid? No, he says, David hadar Omar Levi anochi boilecha b'shem Hashem tzivakos Elokei ma'archos Yisrael asher cherafta. That I'm going to come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, of the armies of Israel that you have blasphemed against. Okay, then we go on and we analyze the psukim further. It says, Vayigasha plishti hashkem v'ha'arei v'yisyatzei v'arboim yom. That the Philistine, this Goliath, comes out to the battlefront against the Jews 40 days in a row, morning and evening, taunting the Jews, saying, send me someone who you think can defeat me. I challenge you. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan kedei levatlan mikriya shema shacharis va'arvis. This was in order, again, this is part of the spiritual battle of Goliath. His objective in coming out morning and in evening was to try and stare them from being able to say Kriya Shema in the morning and in the evening. Like we said before, that saying Kriya Shema in the morning and the evening is the cause for victory. And it says that he stood there for 40 days taunting this challenge. This corresponds to the 40 days in which the Torah was given. And Rashi explains what's the correspondence. The fact that it took 40 days for Moshe to be up in Har Sinai to receive the Torah is an indication of the distance that mortal human beings are from the Torah. So it's an indication of some level of weakness, spiritual weakness. And so that spiritual weakness was exploited by Goliath by standing out there and taunting us for 40 days until we were able to gather the spiritual energy that was manifest in David in order to be able to battle him. The pasuk then says that the man of Beinayim from the camps of the Philistines. What does it mean, Beinayim? Like in the middle camps. But what does it mean? So my Beinayim, Amarav Shemivune Mikol Mum, that he was someone who was so well constructed that he had no blemish whatsoever. Ushmuel Amar Beinoni Shebe'echav. Shmuel says he was the middle brother, meaning that he wasn't too monstrous, he wasn't too slight, he was just right in his physique and in his strength. Devei Rabbi Shila Amar Shehu Asui Kibinyan. Devei Rabbi Shila say that he was constructed like a building. He was like what was that football player? They used to call him the refrigerator or something. Fridge. Perry, right. Fridge. Like he was built like a building. Like they would call them the building, right?
We're talking about Goliath?
Yeah.
So he wasn't too big and he wasn't too small. I thought he was huge.
He was, but he was solid, strong. He was well proportioned. That's what I think the Gemara means. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Bar Meya Papi V'Chadanani. So Rabbi Yochanan says Beinayim is from the word that he came from a mixed, jumbled bag, because as they say in Aramaic, he's the son of 100 papis, papi meaning foster or stepfathers, but only one real father. And what that means is that, as we'll see, Goliath's mother was none other than Orpah, the famous Orpah from the book of Ruth. And she apparently, after she left Naomi, as we'll see, she was either raped or submitted herself to hundreds of men. And as a result, no one really knew who the father of her children was.
Rabbi Shloshner says, from Muncie, he says that she was one of the Zionists that was forced upon Shimshon when he was blinded. And that's why maybe she got her strength from.
Isn't that interesting?
See from that. Interesting.
See if the timeline works. Yeah. She must have been quite elderly at that time.
So was Russ, right?
Right. Okay. All right. So very good. So Barmeya Papi V'Chadanani. So he had a lot of stepfathers and only one father that we don't know who he is. The Goliath Shemo Migas, and the Torah, the pasuk then says that his name was Goliath from the town of Gat, which is somewhere in Azza, as we know. So Tani Rav Yosef Shakol Dashan Esimo Kigas. The reason why he's called from the town of Gat is because everyone threshed his mother. That's a euphemism for sexual activity, like an olive press, right? Ksiv I think is it olive press? I think wine press. Sorry, Ksiv. So then it says that to identify where he came from, it says Mima'archos Plishtim, that he was from the Ma'arachos, from the troops of the Plishtim, but it's written without the letter Chaf, the Karinan Ma'archos. So what does the word Ma'aros mean without the letter Chaf? Tani Rav Yosef Shakol Heru Be'imo. Every man had his way with his mother, sexually. Ksiv Harafa, Uchsiv Arpa. Now we go to Shmuel Beis, and Shmuel Beis identifies the 4 giants who were brothers that David fought against, one of them being Goliath, and the other 3 are enumerated in that pasuk over there. And it says that they were all the children of a woman whose name was Harafa. But it also calls her Orpah. The Gemara says they're the same woman. Ravu Shmuel Chad Amar Harafa Shema Velama Nikra Shema Orpah Shahakol Orphan Osame Achareha. So one says that her real name was Harafa, but the reason why she's called Orpah is to describe how she was treated sexually, that men would mount her from the back. The oref is the back of the neck, so they would see the back of her neck when they would be intimate with her. So this is just a description of the degradation that they subjected her to. V'chad Omer Orpa Shema V'lama Nikra Shema Harafa Sha'akol Dashin Osa Kaharifos. Another opinion is that her real name was Arpa, but the reason why she's called Harafa is because the word harifot means crushed wheat that you have to trample on and thresh in order to get it to be crushed. Again, it's a description of the sexual act violently. B'chein hu omer vatikach ha'isha vatifros hamasach al pnei ha'be'er vatishtach alea harifos. We find a similar description of the word for crushed wheat from this pasuk, which says that a woman took a mat, she places it over a well, and she spreads harifos, which is the same word. The iboyis ema mehacha, or you could learn that it means crushed wheat from here. Im techatesh avil b'machtesh b'soch harifos ba'ali. That it says in Mishlei that if you crush the foolish person with a mortar in the midst of his harifos ba'ali with a crusher. So you see that contextually the word harifos in these two psukim means crushed wheat, and it's obviously there's more depth here, but basically these two psukim were just brought in to identify that the word heref or harifos means something that is violently crushed in order, and that's a euphemism again for the sexual act. Ves arbas eile yuladu laharafa begas. Vayuplu biyad Davidu v'yaravadav. And the pasuk therefore in Shmuel Beis says that these 4 giants were born to a woman whose name was Harafa in the town of Gat, and all 4 of them fell into the clutches of David or his servants. Mainin, who were these 4 brothers? Amar of Chisda, Saf, Umedon, Golias, v'Yishbi Benov. These were their 4 names. Vayuplu biyad Davidu v'yaravadav, dichsiv vatishak orpa lachamosa. And what caused them all to fall into the hands of David? It goes back to their mother Orpah, that in the story of Rus, Orpah and Rus first both want to stay with Naomi, go with her to Eretz Yisrael. Naomi turns them both away, and eventually Orpah finally relents, and she leaves her, and it says that she gives her a kiss, and then she walks away. The Rus davka ba, but Rus still clung to her. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yavou b'nei hanishuka, v'yiplu biyad b'nei hadivuka. So what it means is that Hashem says, let the one who parted with a kiss, and let her fall into the clutches of one who is the divuka, who doggedly and tenaciously sticks to the Jewish people. In other words, sometimes a friendly kiss, but a kiss that represents departure and abandonment, is far less desirable than someone who doggedly and even stubbornly sticks to you. You may not like it initially, but ultimately Rus was the one who stuck with it and with tenacity, and therefore she's the one who emerged victorious. What irony! If Orpah would have only stuck on for another moment, she too would have merited to be part of the Jewish people, but instead she loses it all. And she has children who she sires through very difficult situations, and these children fall as the Philistines into the hands of David. Darash Rava bischar arba demosha harida orpa al chamosa zachsa v'yatsu mimenu arba'a giborim. That it's in the merit that Orpah shed 4 tears, because it says that she cried twice. And when you cry, every time you cry, there's 1 tear that comes from each eye. So if you cry twice, that's 4 tears. Shenamar vatisena kolan vativkena od, because it says that they cried out and they shed tears a second time. So ksiv chetz chaniso v'karinan eitz chaniso. So now let's go back to the story of Goliath. It says that the wooden handle of his spear is kiminor or gim, that it was like some kind of weaving apparatus. The pasuk is describing the hugeness of Goliath's spear. But it spells the word eitz, which is the wooden handle, it spells it with a ches instead of an ayin, and calls it chetz chaniso. So what do you see from there? Amar Rabbi Elazar, adayin lo higi'ani lechatzi shvacho shelo sarasha. That the word chetz is from the word chatzi, which means to allude to the fact that no matter how much we can describe Goliath's enormity and how formidable he was, we're only describing not even half of how really fearsome he was. But you see from here that it's not appropriate to praise an evil person and to describe him fully. So the Gemara says, "V'lo lefateach beklal." then why did you describe him at all? If you're not supposed to describe the virtues or the talents of a wicked person, then what's the point of describing him at all in the pasuk? Answers the Gemara, La'uduye shvache de David. No, you need to explain to us how successful David was. If Goliath would have been just a shmendrik and a nebbish kind of guy, so then there's no victory for David. But when you describe really how truly formidable he was, granted, we're not telling you the whole story, but at least you see even from a portion of his description how fearsome he was, that only plays up David's victory.
You're giving it a context. You're giving it a context.
You're giving it a context. B'nei Amon bo b'nitzchano shel shavach chulei. Now we're finished with Goliath, and we go now to the next thing that the Kohen Mashuach Milchama tells the people. Look, in the times of David, they had the Ammonites and the Arameans had a very powerful general. His name was Shovach, and he also fell. So Ksiv Shavach u'Ksiv Shofach. So there are two places. One is in Sefer Shmuel, and one is in Divrei Hayamim, where this story is repeated. And in one place it's spelled with a beis, and the other place it's spelled with a pei. So was his name Shovach or was it Shofach? So Rav Shmuel Charomer Shofach Shemo V'Lamani Kro Shemo Shovach Shasui Keshovach. So one opinion is that his real name was Shofach, and the reason he's spelled with a letter Vez in Sefer Shmuel is to tell us that he was built solid like a bird coop. Just like you can't knock it down, so too he stood tall. He stood his ground. V'chad Omer Shovach Shemo V'Lamani Kro Shemo Shofach Shekol Haroasa Nishbach Lefanav Kikiton. Now, the other opinion says that his real name was Shovach, but the reason why he's called Shofach in Divrei Hayamim is that if you saw him, you'd get so scared, you'd immediately lose your bowels and have diarrhea right there on the spot. Okay, and you'd just spill out like a cistern. Now, and then it says, Ashpaso kekever pasuach. Now we have another pasuk. This is from Sefer Yirmiyah, this pasuk, and it's talking about the general of arms of Nebuchadnezzar's army. And it says that his quiver, in other words, his arsenal, was like kekever pasuach, was like an open grave. It was so filled with weapons that, forget about it. So kulam giborim, and all of the army were mighty warriors. So Rav Shmuel v'Amri la Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi Chad Amar b'Shosh Zarkin Chaitz Osin Ashpasos. So why does it describe the ashpaso, the quiver, in talking about ashpa, which is a pile of garbage? So one explains that any soldier of Nebuchadnezzar's army that would shoot an arrow, he was so adept at archery that one arrow could fell a pile of soldiers, and there would be piles and piles of corpses just from the shot of an arrow. Shel chalolim. V'shema tomer she'umnim bikrav, tamulomar kulam giborim. So maybe you'll argue that the archers, that was their only specialty, that they knew how to shoot, but there was nothing else special about them. No, that's why the pasuk says they were warriors as well. They were good at hand-to-hand combat too. Another explanation of Nebuchadnezzar's army, the reason why they're called ashpatot, piles, is because they were so huge and they ate so much food to get their energy that when they would defecate, they would make piles and piles of dung because they ate so much. V'shema tomar mipnei shecholi me'ayim heim tamulomar kulam gibarim. Don't think that they defecated so much because they had intestinal problems. No, it's because they were mighty warriors, and that's why the pasuk says kulam giborim. Amar Rav Mari shma mina hayman denafish zivlei chole me'ayimu. You learn from this whole discussion that if a person defecates excessively, that's not a healthy thing. That's actually a sign of some intestinal problem. Bob, can you bear that out?
I don't want to bear it out, but
I guess it depends how much you eat, right? In other words, if you eat excessively, forget about it. But in other words, if you eat normal amounts of food and you still find yourself with large amounts of defecation, then obviously your body has a problem absorbing the nutrition, and it's a bad sign. So l'may nafkamina litrach benafshe, that you have to go see a doctor if you find yourself with this activity. Next and finally, this is the very, very profound last teaching that also is the source of this debate between Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi. The pasuk says in Mishlei, "Da'aga belev ish yashchena," that if a person has worry in his heart, he should yashchena. So what does the word yashchena mean? It's a machlokes. Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi chad omar yashchena midato, that you should remove it from your thoughts. V'chad Omar Yisichena la'acherim. And the other one says you should discuss it with other people. Now this is such a profound psychological insight. There are two different personality types, the Gemara is basically saying. There are some people, when they have trouble, when they have things that are really on their mind and really bothering them, the best antidote for that kind of problem, distract yourself. Don't think about it. Put it aside. Read the paper. Get involved with a hobby. Spend time doing something else, and it'll be gone. But there are other people that's not therapeutic for them. There are other people who the only way that they can get it off their chest is if they discuss it with other people. And the key is that it's elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. Both are true. You just have to know what kind of person you are. If you're a person who needs to talk, then you can't suppress it. But if you're the kind of person that's only going to get more aggravated by discussing it, then you're better off sometimes just distracting yourself into something else. Have a wonderful day.